Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe today. We begin here in Nigeria, where the Supreme Court has upheld the elections of 8 Nigerian governors on Wednesday. As follows, they are Dapo Abiodun of Ogun State, Udom Emmanuel of Akwa Ibom, Bello Masari of Katsina State, Abdullahi Sule of Nasarawa State, David Umahi of Ebonyi State, Babajide Sanwo-Olu of Lagos State, Seyi Makinde of Oyo State, and Nasir El-Rufai of Kaduna State. Now, in the case of Ogun, Mary Peter Odili, the judge who led the 7-man panel, dismissed the appeal of Adekunle Akinlade governorship candidates of the Allied People's Movement, ruling that the applicants failed to prove all of their allegations. On Akwa Ibom, the Apex Court dismissed the appeal of Nsima Ekere, governorship candidates of the All Progressives Congress, challenging the election of Emmanuel Odili. Said Ekere's appeal, in quote, appeal lacked merit and it was dismissed, end quote. So the Nigerian courts have upheld the rulings of 8 governors. Doctor, what's your take on the verdicts?
Well, I think it's a very good development, positive development. Part of the electoral process is that those who are aggrieved, have the right under the law post-election to go to the tribunal. From the tribunal, they could go to the appeal court, all the way to the Supreme Court. And, if the litigant, if the petitioner insists that he wants to exhaust the judicial process and not accept whatever is decided, it's perfectly within the rights of such persons to do so. So with regard to the governorship elections we have in these 8 states, the other parties have insisted on going all the way to the Supreme Court. And we're having one heavily, impressively productive day at the Supreme Court. 8 cases in all being determined by one panel after another. And the major grounds on which the various panels of the Supreme Court, entered their judgments was that, look, many of the litigants, were unable to prove their allegations of malpractices or whatever other allegations they put before the court. In about 3 or 4 other cases, the Supreme Court justices ruled that the cases lacked merit. So I think now, that the process has been exhausted. We have had, the victorious governors celebrating. Naturally.
Yes.
We have had PDP issuing a statement commending the outcome with regard to Akwa Ibom State and Oyo State, where the governors are from the People's Democratic Party. We also hope, of course, that, the various petitioners who have lost out in this would, see clearly that is the rule of law that has prevailed. And we commend those petitioners, too, for seeking, to prove their matter, to seek redress through court process and not resort to self-help.
Absolutely.
I think that is also commendable. So for the governors who have, been declared legitimately and legally and validly elected as governors in their various states, I think that it's also important for them also, to realize that this is an opportunity for them to run an inclusive government, to extend a hand of fellowship to the other parties who have lost out in court. Because they must realize that, they are not governors for their parties. They are governors for everybody in the state. In many of these states also, we've also had issues of, slowness in terms of performance. And the explanation that has been given is that, well, many of these governors, they wanted a situation whereby their matters will be determined by the Supreme Court before they can really settle down. Now they have that opportunity with the victory that they got at the Supreme Court yesterday. And we hope that in the various states, from Oyo to Kaduna and Katsina to Ebonyi to Akwa Ibom, that the governors will, raise the level of their performance, increase the pace of service delivery, and justify, the support that they have received from the people of the various states. And now this victory, that at the Supreme Court, which has further legitimized, their emergence in their various states. The only way they can reward the people is to perform and to carry everybody along.
And to do exactly what
and
they
not
were
to say,
for.
this person fought me all the way to the Supreme Court. Now that the Supreme Court has ruled in my favor, it's time to deal with them. I hope that no governor will assume that kind of backward, primitive stance.
Absolutely.
Because you never know in Nigeria. Yes.
Very true. And on to our next story. In a bid to meet the December 31st, 2019 deadline for them to achieve the 65% minimum loan-to-deposit ratio stipulated by the Central Bank of Nigeria, banks have now adjusted downwards their lending and deposit rates. Now, the review is also attributed to the recent decision by the central bank banning individuals and local firms from investing in both its primary and secondary open market operation auctions. Now, our sister outfit This Day had on Monday reported that the average monthly deposit rate was about 4%. But findings as of Wednesday showed that some banks have further lowered their average monthly deposit rate to about 3%. On the other hand, findings showed that average monthly lending rates for banks' consumer banking products is about 2%. So 4% was what we initially had reported, and findings show that some banks have actually lowered it to about 3%. Doctor, what is your take on this?
Well, I mean, on Monday, when this day newspaper reported that the average monthly deposit rate is 4%.
Yes.
But now today, the same newspaper is reporting that, the rates have crashed further to about, 3% in some of the banks. And some of the banks have already issued, statements informing their, customers and even encouraging the customers to also take advantage of treasury bills and bonds. But generally, the improvement that we have seen, the banks trying to hurry up to meet the deadline of December 31st, I think it's a positive development. It means that, they are responding positively to the directive by the Central Bank of Nigeria. The Central Bank of Nigeria, in an attempt to ensure, price stability and promote creation of credit, and also ensure that, the banks focus more on intermediation, had in September, given the September deadline of 60% for loan-to-deposit ratio minimum, and then again, when it was discovered that some banks did not, meet that requirement, they were sanctioned. And then shortly after, based on its findings, the central bank also, discovered that some banks and individuals had tried to find a way around it. So they came up with the directive that firms and individuals should not participate in the primary and secondary open market operations auctions. And then almost, immediately they came up with the LDR ratio of 65%, and the deadline is in December. So the banks know that if they don't meet the deadline, they will again be sanctioned by the central bank. But the overall objective, of course, is to mobilize support, lending to critical sectors, and particularly small and medium-scale enterprises. And they focus on the SMEs by both the central bank and the Ministry of Finance would, in the long run, be helpful in terms of stimulating growth.
Yes.
But the danger that has to be looked out for is, these banks, in an attempt to meet the deadline, piling up non-performing loans. Because if they pile up non-performing loans, that again could be counterproductive in the long run. However, the Central Bank of Nigeria, in the light of the achievement that it's been able to record in terms of the policy measures that it adopted this year, is even looking at, tighter measures in 2020. The tight stance that the CBN has maintained this year, the CBN governor says in the short term, in 2020, will be retained. And then other measures which have not been disclosed, will also be introduced to ensure, price and exchange rate stability, to stimulate GDP growth and overall economic growth within the economy. Now, that objective, I think it's welcome, because there have been rising, inflation expectations, and all of this would need to be managed. And indeed, the banks play a strategic role, within the economy. So if rates are crashing, the CBN governor can legitimately beat his chest and say that, well, some of the measures that the CBN adopted this year, monetary policies wise, have been very fruitful and useful.
I'm glad that you pointed out, Doctor, as well, the danger of non-performing loans and banks running towards non-performing loans ahead of the deadline, because that would not be the way to go about it, and it would be very counterproductive. But let's move on to the main headline around the world today, over to Washington, D.C., where Donald Trump has become only the third president to be impeached by the House of Representatives, bringing him a step closer to being removed from office. Now, 2 articles of impeachment were passed over his behavior in the Ukraine scandal, one for abuse of power and the other for obstruction of Congress. Not a single Republican voted for either article, a fact the White House seized on to portray the Democrats' impeachment drive as motivated by political bias. Now, the issue will now pass over to the Senate, the other body that makes up the U.S. Congress, which is going to hold a trial on whether to convict and remove Mr. Trump from office next month. Although we don't know when the articles are going to make their way over to the Senate at this point, because Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has not made that point clear. Doctor, what is your take on Donald Trump becoming the 3rd U.S. president to be impeached?
Yes, 3rd U.S. president to be impeached by the House of Representatives after Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. But, this has been the most partisan, of the impeachment that we have seen. And I think that the pain for President Trump is self-inflicted. He has been accused under Article 775 or Resolution 775 of high crimes and misdemeanors in office, because that's the basis for, the impeachment process. And in this regard, 2 articles of impeachment: abuse of office and obstruction of justice. And on both counts, the Democrats, having the majority in the House of Representatives, voted for his impeachment. But let's go on a short break.
Yes.
When we come back, we'll look at what has happened in the House of Reps in the U.S.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News, and we are still taking a look at the news headlines and touching on the most important story of the day: President Donald Trump becoming the 3rd U.S. president to get impeached. Doctor?
Yes, so as I said, it was a historic moment at the House of Representatives yesterday. And then you'll find, the parties practically not listening to each other. It was originally supposed to be 6 hours of debate as determined by the House Rules Committee, but they ended up spending 10 hours, including, some of the Republicans comparing President Trump to Jesus Christ.
Yes, I saw that.
And how Pontius Pilate was fairer to Jesus Christ than the House of Reps has been. So it was really partisan. But at the end of the day, the outcome is not unexpected. We had imagined that, the Democrats who had been on President Trump's matter, accusing him of, violating the American democracy, will be impeached. And that's precisely what happened. Tomorrow, the matter goes to the Senate, and the Senate will debate it. And, the removal process, the trial, as it is called, maybe held on till January, because, Congress will be going on Christmas recess. But in January, what we expect also is that the Republicans are going to use the advantage of their majority to keep President Trump in office.
Absolutely.
There are 53 Republican senators.
The Democrats will need about 20.
Yes, they will need 20 persons to cross from the Republican side to the Democratic side. And that's not likely to happen.
It's impossible.
Because even yesterday, the Republicans, they were arguing over procedures and all that just to delay and to stall. So even if President Trump is not, if he survives the trial and is not removed, what happens? America is divided down the middle. He's holding on strongly to his Republican base. Okay, will it turn out as an advantage for him in the 2020 election? Or will the American people be persuaded to say that they have had enough of this president? But whatever happens, I think that the Democrats have been able to score, a victory over the Republicans. But the important thing is that they are talking about the rule of law, defending the Constitution, and protecting American democracy from being violated by any individual, no matter how highly placed, for selfish reasons.
Absolutely, Doctor. And now we will take one last story. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will set out his plans for government later on today following a sweeping election win focused on delivering Brexit and supporting the health service. Now, Queen Elizabeth II will open Parliament in a lavish ceremony where she's going to read out the Conservative leader's legislative programme for the months ahead. Top of Johnson's to-do list will be a bill to ratify the terms of Britain's exit from the European Union, which he negotiated in October but could not get through Parliament. Equipped with a majority of 80 in the 650-seat House of Commons, he hopes to push through the deal in time to get Brexit done, in quotes, on the next EU deadline of January 31st. So the Prime Minister is setting out his agenda after his landslide of a victory. Doctor, over to you.
Well, the agenda is usually written by the government, but it is delivered in Parliament by the Queen.
Yes.
Because it is Her Majesty's government, and she sets the agenda technically. You'll recall that on October 14, the Queen had addressed Parliament. There was the Queen's speech, but because of the problem over Brexit and the snap election, tomorrow, at 11:34 GMT, the Queen will open the Parliament again. It will be accompanied by the Prince of Wales, that's Prince Charles, standing in for the Duke of Edinburgh, who had retired since 2017. And I don't think it's going to be a lavish ceremony because we're told that the Queen and the Prince will not wear ceremonial robes and the procession will be a reduced one. But what is the agenda that the Queen is going to present before Parliament? As she opens Parliament, it will include the NHS. We're expecting that there will be about 20 bills, 20 pieces of legislation that the Johnson government is seeking. Funding, about 3.4% or more increase in funding for NHS. Recruitment of more policemen, 10,000. The introduction of an Australian system-based points-based immigration system, longer sentences for people engaged in very serious crimes. Brexit, of course, the withdrawal agreement bill will also be presented. Action to tackle unlawful use of drones. Plan to provide more funding. To reduce taxation up to about almost 50% for small businesses, including independent cinemas. So, and then, of course, proposals on education and infrastructure. All of this to be in line with, the promise made by Boris Johnson that within 100 days of getting into office, he will get Brexit done and he will deliver on his various campaign promises. But one touchy point is whether his government will be able to finalize a trade deal with the European Union by December 2020.
Sorry,
yes,
true.
by December 2020. And, he and his team, they're insisting that, yes, they will not let it go beyond even a 10-month period. But we'll see how that happens. So tomorrow, Parliament will open afresh, and Boris Johnson gets the royal mandate, in addition to the mandate that he has been given by the people, to follow up on his campaign promises and the agenda that his government has designed.
Well, all the best to him. And now Aaron Akirijola joins us to talk about some sports. Hey, Aaron. Good morning.
Aaron.
Doctor, good morning.
How are you doing? I hope we don't have any gender-based topics today.
Okay, clearly not. And yesterday we had the biggest biggest club game go down in Spain, but it actually grabbed you. Yes, it was a draw, but it grabbed the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Yeah. Let's tell you that coach of Barcelona, Ernesto Valverde, played down suggestions that the Barcelona players had been affected by the controversy surrounding the El Clasico with Real Madrid. The match had been initially scheduled for the 26th of October, but was rescheduled due to political turmoil that gripped Catalonia after separatist leaders were given lengthy jail sentences 2 months ago. The game was played amidst a protest near the stadium in favor of Catalan independence. There were helicopters circling overhead when both teams got off the team bus before the game. An announcement was made repeatedly during the second half that spectators should leave the ground from the north side of the stadium because of the trouble outside the ground of the north side. And quite so, this has always been, the fear has always been that this particular game, which actually gathers quite a number of people and grabs the headlines of the world, will be used. Barcelona's game, Barcelona and Real Madrid is just a mirror of what has been happening in Spain. Because over the years, people have always seen Real Madrid as the team that has always been supported by the government of Spain. And Barcelona, decided to form their own as a means to tackle the government of the day. And that was the genesis of the whole Barcelona and Real Madrid rivalry. But right now, it's taken it to another dimension.
Absolutely.
As I said, that some Barcelona supporters even joined this particular protest that happened yesterday, and they kept on insisting that it was time to sit down and talk. That banner was everywhere in the stadium yesterday.
Well, I mean, this is a case of, sports, or in this particular case, football, being politicized.
Yeah. Yes.
And, you really cannot always draw the line between sports and politics, or stop people from using the platform of a football event to make political statements. This particular protest was organized by a group called Democratic Tsunami.
Yeah.
And what do they want? They want, Spain to sit down and talk with the Catalan separatists. Spain has, bluntly refused, seeing these separatists as, enemies of the state. And then they also want the jailed separatist leaders to be released. And they've used the platform of a very important game between two major rivals, to make their statement. But the right to self-determination, is an internationally, basic right. But you then find that, of course, the United Nations may have conventions on the right to self-determination, but in many parts of the world, we've seen the right to self-determination leading to conflict, protracted conflict, and the attempt by, established authorities to stop those, who say they want to separate or break away.
Yeah, but looking at these things closely, it seems those that are fighting for this particular movement don't seem to look at the repercussion, because Barcelona is always a thriving hub when it comes to businesses, because it's one of the fashion capitals of the world. When it talks about fashion, businesses have been affected. Football also, if this actually happens, football will be majorly affected. And what Barcelona brings in is quite huge.
But repercussion is also never their interest.
Well, but their demand is legitimate. They say, Spain, sit and talk. They're asking for dialogue.
Yeah, let's see.
As a minimum precondition for whatever, they may do. But of course, there's always a cost to any form of protest, be it in Spain or in Hong Kong.
Rightly so. Now let's move on to Japan, and let's say that the Tokyo Olympic organizers and the government officials are preparing for everything, including an earthquake taking place during next year's games. They ran a simulation disaster drill on Thursday at the new Ariake venue that will be the site for the gymnastics during the Olympics. The drill presumed a 7.3 magnitude earthquake in the neighboring Tokyo Bay. Just over 100 firefighters, police, Japan Self-Defense Force personnel took part. Japan is hit regularly by earthquakes and takes preparedness seriously. The threat of quakes and the summer Tokyo heat are the major worries as organizers prepare to open the Olympics on the 24th of July, 2020. And this is Japan leaving no stone unturned.
Yes, I mean, as you have said, Japan and the area of that Japan Bay, has a very active, tectonic plate.
Yeah.
But what is interesting here is the attempt, to prepare ahead. This is an event that will still take place in July 2020. And by now, months ahead, early warning signals have been monitored, response teams have been put in place. Now, the earthquake may not happen, right?
True.
It may or may not happen. But you see an example here of, organizers not leaving anything out in terms of detail. And each time we see this kind of example, I say, look, there are some basic lessons we need to learn, in some other parts of the world about how we prepare.
Remember when we had the Asaba Games, was it last year or the year before, and athletes from other countries across Africa had put out statements literally complaining that there were potholes on our tracks, So there are definitely lessons to learn.
Yes, they are, and they must be commended because they are being very thorough, they're being very detailed about the games. They want it to be one of the best. In the last time the Olympic Games came to Tokyo was back in '64, so they want to make it a very memorable one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. We'll see you again tomorrow morning.
Absolutely.